What impact did Leonard Read, the founder of the Foundation for Economic Education, have on the libertarian movement? Join Richard Ebeling and me in this week's Libertarian Angle as we examine that question. Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and this is this week's Libertarian Angle, the show that y'all know brings you the principled, uncompromising case for the libertarian philosophy, the free society. I'm joined, as I am every week, or most weeks, by Richard Ebeling, professor of economics at the Citadel. Richard, good to see you again for another round of Libertarian Angle.
It's great to see you and to be with our viewers and listeners, whose attention and giving a little bit of their time is always very much appreciated by us.
Yeah, thank you for tuning in. If you're new, come and visit us at fff.org for 32 years of hardcore, pure, no compromise, take no prisoners perspectives on libertarianism. You know, Richard, we've been discussing some giants of libertarian thought in our recent episodes of Libertarian Angle. So I thought we'd continue with that theme and talk about a man who I know has served as a tremendous influence in your life, my life, and the lives of many, many libertarians. And that man is Leonard Read, the founder of the Foundation for Economic Education. Longtime supporters of FFF know that when I discovered libertarianism, it was through a series of little books that had been published in the 1950s by the Foundation for Economic Education under Leonard Read's auspices. And I discovered these books in the late 1970s. And as I was poring over them, they were called Essays on Liberty, and they were a compilation of essays. I think they were more like a 10-volume series or so. But the library, the public library where I found these, just through sheer happenstance, had only 4 volumes. So I checked all 4 out. And, you know, like I've said before, it was a road to Damascus experience for me. But the essays that had the most profound, powerful impact on me were those by Leonard Read. I mean, it was just incredible. Read's writing was so clear and so succinct and so powerful that I almost felt like he was just personally talking to me or writing to me. So I immediately, when I discovered that FEE, as the foundation is widely known, was still in existence, I immediately signed up for a seminar there. They had weekend seminars and week-long seminars in the summer. I signed up for a weekend seminar. I bought every single book by Leonard Read, along with a lot of other books there. And Read had a nice little tradition of personally inscribing every book that he sent out. And there were small books, little tiny books, but I tell you, Richard, they were all so powerful for me. Now, you know, the other authors as well, authors that we've discussed in Libertarian Angle, Mises and Shodorov and others, you know, they had a powerful impact on me because of that purist libertarian philosophy, no compromise perspective they took. But Leonard Read's writings were just far beyond the most powerful on influencing me to move into a libertarian direction. And I knew that my life was changing at this point. I later wrote an essay that was published in the Freeman, which was the monthly journal of the Foundation for Economic Education, called Leonard Read Changed My Life. And by this time, ironically, I had been practicing law there in Texas, as you know, and I was living in Dallas, and I got offered a job by the Foundation for Economic Education as their program director. And that was the turning point in my life. Should I continue practicing law, which I had dreamed of doing as a kid? I mean, when I was a kid, I'd write those essays in grade school about what you want to be when you grow up. It was always, I'm going to be a lawyer. And I knew that this was the turning point in my life. Should I continue practicing law, or should I go where my heart was? And I decided to go where my heart was. And by this time, Leonard had passed away. But the work that he did was just phenomenal as far as my life was concerned. So at this point, let me turn it over to you and give me your perspective on Leonard E. Read.
Okay, well, as I usually try to do, let me sort of put him in the context of a little bit of his own biography, if I may. He was born in 1898 and passed away in 1982. So he was in his mid 80s when he passed away. He was born in Michigan. Uh, he had not been able to actually go to and finish college because his father had passed away and he needed to help support his family. But then he got married and he started a sort of a grocery business in Ann Arbor, Michigan, which did fairly well at first, but eventually went bust. And so around in the early 1930s, the Depression obviously had started setting in. He moved his family to the West Coast. He ended up working for one of the branches of the California Chamber of Commerce, first in Burlingame, and then eventually he moved down to Los Angeles and got promoted until around, I believe, 1939. He became the general director of the Los Angeles Chamber of Commerce. It was in the mid 1930s that he became enamored by this freedom philosophy, as he liked to call it. The New Deal had begun in 1933 with FDR coming into the presidency. There was a huge push in the name of fighting the Depression for all sectors of the US society to get behind the government. We have nothing to fear but fear itself, and we must fight this as if it was a war to get us out of the Depression. And there was a lot of pressure on American businesses to cooperate with the government, particularly since during the first few years of the New Deal, there was an attempt by the Roosevelt administration to impose what basically amounted to a fascist type economy. Private ownership, but with government command and control and direction of prices, wages, production, and so on. And the LA Chamber of Commerce had the direction of supporting the administration, and they sent Leonard Read to talk to a recalcitrant businessman who had one of the Edison Electric companies in Southern California, a man named William Mullendore. And as I heard the story later on, he went to see this fellow Mullendore. Mullendore listened patiently, said, "Mr. Mullendore, we have to get behind the New Deal. Get America moving again, by golly." And after about a half hour, Mr. Mullendore said, "Mr. Read, I understand what you're saying, and I appreciate the point of view, but I have something to explain to you. And I'll admit it's going to take about an hour. But if you'll allow me to respond to you, I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have." And in that hour, Read later wrote, William Mullendore had basically laid out this freedom philosophy: individual liberty, private property, limited government, free enterprise, free exchange, the morality of dignity and respect for the natural rights of the individual. And as Read said, it was like, a conversion on the road to Damascus, the scales fall from your eyes. And this had this huge impact. Then, reinforcing that, there was a later story I read about that around 1938 or 39, Leonard Read, enamored with these ideas, was giving talks in the Los Angeles area. And there was, in the audience for one of these Chamber of Commerce talks, was a recently retired economics professor who had been teaching at Harvard University and had retired to Southern California. And his name was Thomas Nixon Carver. He was actually a very good old-fashioned liberal free market economist. And after the talk, he went up to Leonard Read and he said, Mr. Read, you sound like someone. And Read said, who? And he said, Frederick Bastiat. Read had not really heard about till then. And he said, yeah, you should read Frederick Bastiat. And that got him even more on this path. And he continued this work, but after the Second World War, he wanted to devote more time to just advocating these ideas. With the upshot that he was offered a job with the National Association of Manufacturing to be sort of an educational director. But when he took the job and moved to New York, he was not particularly happy with it. As he said, they said, well, we have to present both sides. And he was saying, but right now we only hear one side, and they have a monopoly, and that's the pro-government side. What we need is a platform in which the freedom idea can be presented consistently and logically, coherently, and to allow people just to hear this on an uninterrupted stage. So he had to step down, and then with the support of several businessmen, he decided to form the Foundation for Economic Education, which opened its doors in the spring of 1946 in a delightful old mansion in Irvington on Hudson. It's about a 40-minute drive north of New York City in Westchester County, not far from the Hudson River. And he opened his doors there. And his idea was to present this vision of an absolutely pristine free society. He started bringing on staff some articulate advocates of these. Floyd Baldy Harper, who had been teaching at Cornell, who later went on to found himself in the early 1960s the Institute for Humane Studies, and a variety of Orville Watts, who was a rather well-known economist at the time, who was also very free market. And then in the mid-1950s, he purchased, I believe for $1, the rights to what had been a news editorial magazine coming out twice a month called the Freeman. But it was having financial and other difficulties, so Read purchased it. And that became the flagship magazine for the Foundation for Economic Education from around 1956, if I remember correctly, until the early part of the 21st century, when the foundation, under new management, decided to end the publication of the Freeman completely. But like you, Jacob, I was greatly enamored by the clarity, persuasiveness, the consistency, the principledness in not only Read's works, which of course we're focusing on, but everything that came out from Fee. If I could just sort of pick on some of those themes, which I know you have stories to too. One of the ones that had a big impression on me was a monograph that he wrote in the middle of the Korean War called Conscience on the Battlefield. I know that had an impact on you too. And it's told through the thoughts as an American soldier is dying on the battlefield in Korea. And he's asking himself, how have I ended up here? Why has my government sent me into this foreign war? Why have I been put in the position of either killing the enemy or facing death as he attempts to kill me? Is this the role of government? Is this what a free society is about? Should the government be fighting these type of wars rather than securing the liberty of its own citizens? Now, that was not a popular piece to write or publish in the middle of the Korean War, but that shows the principle of the man. It was also captured in the title of a book that he published in around 1964 called Anything That's Peaceful. The idea that in a free society, the hallmark of free men is that they have the liberty to live their life peacefully and honestly, in free and voluntary association with all others in the society, both inside and outside the marketplace, in any way they wish, to find their own purpose, goal, happiness, meaning for their life, for mutual prosperity with their fellow free men. And the government's role is only to secure their liberties and not to violate it. And once the rights are violated in this manner, liberty is diminished, and the morality of the voluntarism of the society is undermined and eventually destroyed. These things had a huge impact on me. And I'll just tell one more story before I turn it over to you, which I've mentioned a few times when we've talked about these freedom ideas and Fee. And that is, I too went to a Fee seminar in June of 1974, after I had attended an Austrian economics conference in Vermont. And it was a great week. Hans Senhol spoke, Henry Hazlitt was there. other FEE staff members such as Bettina Graves, Paul Poirot, Ed Opitz. But the only talk I remember is Leonard Read's. And this captured the idea of what his philosophy was about. In the middle of the lecture, he had the lights turned off. And he was holding an electric candle in his hand and with one of those dimmer switches. And he turned it on where it was just a flicker of light. And he said, please notice that in this room of darkness, even with this wee bit of light, all of our eyes are attracted to it. And he began to illuminate the room by turning up the dimmer knob and a little bit more light. And he said, notice now you see me sort of in part of the front of the room. Again, a bit more. Now we're seeing people in the front rows. So finally he turns it up full. And now practically, even with this little electric candle, the room is fairly well lit up. And he said, that's what each of us can be, lights of liberty. And the illumination that we are able to emanate is a function of how knowledgeable we've become, how articulate we can be, and how persuasive our means of communication with our fellow men. So to spark another light and another light and another light, and by spreading the ideas of freedom one mind at a time, one person at a time, eventually there'll be enough illumination of liberty in our society that the collectivist ideas will be pushed into a few dark corners in the room, and we will have the lightness and the brightness and the enlightenment of a free society. That was his view and philosophy of things, which had an immense impact on me, both before and certainly after that. And just one other point, if I may, Jacob. He used to like to tell a story about a fellow named Whitey. Now, if I remember correctly, maybe you'll correct me, I believe he met Whitey on a plane, traveling to give a talk or a conference. And Whitey was a labor union member, very gruff. And Leonard said, I could have responded and said, unions, damn, be damned, coercive, you're bad for other non-union workers. No, he said, he decided to follow his rule of being polite and courteous and not allowing Whitey's rudeness to be reciprocated, but instead by politeness, courtesy, and patience. And he started talking to Whitey and then communicating and sharing correspondence with Whitey and sending him literature until finally Whitey, this die-hard, dogmatic, compulsory union man, basically came around to Leonard Read's view and then became his own light for liberty. These types of things are important at a time when it seems as if everything is going wrong and how could we ever win? We should remember the power of one person in having the courage to speak what they know to be true and to share those ideas in politeness and courtesy with degrees of however you have the time to learn these things with reason and logic and historical fact and rhetorical persuasiveness as to the best of your ability. And eventually one mind becomes several minds and then other minds. And then finally, slowly but surely, in ways that are difficult to imagine or understand, the society has been changed for the better. That highlights the essence and the meaning and the value of Leonard Read's life work and makes him important both then and I think still for the cause of liberty.
Yeah, that's an excellent summary of Read in his life. One of the interesting things about Read, Richard, is that he has had such a profound impact on the libertarian movement, and especially through the foundation that he formed, the Foundation for Economic Education. I would be willing to bet that 90% of libertarians would say that FEE has played a big important role in their intellectual development. And yet Read doesn't have the acclaim that Mises does, or Hayek, or Milton Friedman, and so forth. But I would put Read right there alongside those guys in terms of impact on this movement. Your story of Bill Mullendore is a fascinating one. I remember learning about it when I was learning about Read, because Read would talk about it in his books. And I should mention, with respect to Read's books, I would recommend his books to everybody. I mean, I assume they're still in print. At least many of them are. Leonard Read is one of the most, or was one of the most profound, deep thinkers you will ever encounter. But he had this unique ability of putting his ideas in a very simple, easy to understand format. It was a unique ability he had. But the experience with Mullendore is interesting with respect to methodology because, you know, our methodology, Richard, here at FFF has always been, look, you got to just speak the truth about what's going on. You can't worry about, you know, is the world changing? Am I saving the world and all this? And Read was the one that had the big impact on me on this. Read always talked about, as you indicated, self-improvement. You know, people say, what can I do to advance liberty? The world is going to hell in a handbasket right now. We need to do something now, Mr. Read. What Read's answer would be, work on yourself. Just work on yourself. Don't go out there and trying to convert the world, trying to buttonhole the world. Work on yourself. Self-improvement. Improve your own understanding of liberty. He was a golfer, but he often said, nobody comes to me and asks about how to play golf. They go to Arnold Palmer or, you know, some other golf expert, because he says, I play golf, but I'm not an expert. But he says, when it comes to liberty, I've spent my life trying to understand liberty. And so people will come to me. They gravitate to me to find out ideas on liberty. But he always considered himself a student, and he always made that clear, that when it comes to knowledge, that we're all ignorant. It's just a difference in degree of ignorance. And when it comes to liberty, we're all learning. But he would say, if you want to improve the world, you want a free society, work on yourself, have this light turn on, as you pointed out. And I recall that talk also. He gave it at every fee seminar where he'd turn up the little candle. And he'd say, that light then starts brightening the darkness. That's how to extinguish the darkness, by making your light brighter and brighter and brighter. And you do that, improving your understanding of freedom. Well, so, you know, the methodology that I learned from this, and we talked about this last week with respect to Frank Shuttleroff, is you put the ideas out there into the marketplace of ideas. To me, they've got to be pure, uncompromising, principled ideas, and you don't know the effect they're going to have. You don't know who's going to discover them 20 years later, just as Read couldn't have predicted when he published those little essays back in the 50s that a young lawyer would discover them 20 years later and change the course of his life. Experience with Mullendore is kind of different because Mullendore is there giving Read the case flat out. Now, I would have loved to have had that conversation recorded. I mean, wouldn't you love to hear Mullendore's presentation that caused the whole scales to drop? I mean, it's clear that Read's experience in that 1 hour with Mullendore was the same experience I had poring over those 4 little volumes. I would have loved to hear what Mullendore had to say about the libertarian philosophy in that 1 hour. But clearly it had a remarkable impact. So you can't ever discount the possibility that somebody might be ready. And you're right. You know, Read was over there promoting the New Deal, promoting Roosevelt's New Deal philosophies, his programs. I think it was something called Bacon and Eggs or something like that. And Mullendore straightened him out. So you never know when somebody's over there seeking whether they're ready for freedom or not, but you've got to assume that they might be, and therefore you don't compromise, you don't water down the message, you don't try to couch it in terms that, you know, he's going to find approval. You just set out the philosophy, but you got to be good at it. Clearly Mullendore was good at it, and that comes from, of course, from years of understanding. Your point about conscience on the battlefield is a very good one too. It's a powerful essay. You can find it online for free. Now, when I got to FEE as program director, I knew that Read had kept journals. Now, Read had a philosophy that said, if you write every day, you will be amazed at how your thinking will be clarified, your writing is improved. So he kept a daily journal for, I don't know, 50 years or so. Imagine writing every single day in a journal. And I think what he would do is dictate them to a secretary because his journals were largely typed, as I recall. But when I got to FEE, I said, where are Read's journals? Because, you know, I'd read all his books. I'd exhausted everything I could to learn from his books. But, man, this was like 50 years worth of journals. So they pointed them out to me, and I started going over them, you know, page after page after page. Fascinating. I mean, the guy was very well known in LA. I mean, LA was the largest chamber of commerce in the country. And then he became head, or even before that or after that, I'm not sure, of the Western United States Chamber of Commerce. So there was photographs of him with Hollywood starlets and stuff in these journals. He was very well known out there. But when he published that essay, Richard, he got inundated with attacks from fee supporters. Oh, you're blaming the soldier. You're putting the whole responsibility on the soldier. And Read just stuck by his guns. And I think they later published it. In other words, he never let his fear of loss of donations affect the principled approach that he had to liberty. There's that famous episode where who was the big oil man?
Howard Pugh.
Howard Pugh was there at a board meeting. He was on the board of trustees for fee, and he says, Howard, if you don't change your position favoring free trade, I'm going to resign from fee's board. I'm leaving. And he was a large donor too to fee, J. Howard Pugh. And Leonard looked at him and said, we will miss you. And he was willing to let Pugh go with his big donations, and then Pugh later recanted, or and decided to stay on with fee. But it was a big lesson for me. You don't abandon your principles for the sake of expediency. So Read has a lot going for him. That's why I continue to sing his praises, Richard. I think as time goes on, maybe he will become more widely known as like in the ranks of Mises and Freeman and so forth.
Well, I think an interesting thing is that because he never finished college, and he was sort of like just a well-read and informed layman, he was not treated with respect for a very long time by fellow freedom advocates who had more academic credentials. And I remember coming across a fee publication honoring Leonard Read. And several well-known people did their like little dinner talks. And one of them in this is Friedrich Hayek. And he said that, he must admit that he had never held Read in too high esteem as a thinker. But that changed radically for him when he read one essay by Leonard Read, My Pencil. Now, Hayek had spent a good part of his life, including one of his most famous articles, The Use of Knowledge in Society, on how matching the division of labor is a division of knowledge, and that there's far more knowledge in the world, dispersed, decentralized, little bits in everybody's mind, than any one person can ever know, or help to manage, control, or centrally plan. And that's why you need a price system to coordinate and integrate the minimal amount of information for people to communicate about their wishes as demanders, their abilities to produce as suppliers, and people are guided by the prices in the market. But then, what does Leonard Read do in this essay? He writes, I'm a pencil, and nobody knows how to produce me, because the knowledge involved in producing something as simple as an old-fashioned wood-lead pencil is far more than any one person could ever master or know how to coordinate with all the technology and geographical distancing and time relationships and so on and so forth. And when Hayek said that when he read that, he realized that this was a masterful mind able to see the essence of ideas in ways that could be communicated to even the most common of the common man.
Yeah, and as you pointed out, Richard, he had this remarkable ability to attract to him and to the foundation the purest libertarians of the time. I mean, he was good friends with Mises, and Mises would speak at their seminars. He had Opitz there, Ed Opitz, who was a deep thinker in a libertarian sense. Paul Perot, who remained editor of the Freeman for, 30, 40 years or something. There was Bill Law, who I know you knew. When I went to the Fee Summer Seminar, Bill was one of the most remarkable speakers I've ever heard, especially on free trade. I mean, and Bill and I later became friends. He came and spoke at a Fee seminar that I had in Texas, and there were many other people, Israel Kirzner, I mean, Read was like a magnet that brought together all of these pure, no compromise, principled libertarians making the case. And those were lonely times. I mean, you know, sometimes we feel like we're holding lonely ground here in our time. But imagine doing this in '46 when it's post New Deal, post World War II, the warfare state is coming into existence. You've got the whole welfare state, the whole Keynesian paradigm. And this guy goes out and starts an educational foundation promoting this pure libertarian philosophy. And he attracts to him the people that shared that vision, which I just thought was absolutely fascinating. That small little group, Richard, that relatively small little group was the Acorn.
Yes.
That ultimately developed into this giant oak of liberty that we live under today.
Yeah, you know, about this idea of appreciating the context of the time, I was just, for a variety of reasons, rereading part of a book by another friend of Leonard Read's and Henry Hazlitt's, who's also a journalist, Lawrence Fertig, Prosperity Through Freedom. And he points out that in his little preface or forward to this, that he had started writing a weekly column on economics for the New York World Telegram and Sun, which eventually got syndicated in a lot of things. He started doing this in 1944, not that much before Leonard Read set up FEE. And he says in the forward that when he started writing these, for a long time, all of his mail was hate mail. Because he'd be advocating, the same, free enterprise, limited government, get government out, price system, no regulation, certainly not socialism, the dangers and undesirability of redistribution, all the usual things. And he would get hate mail because, as he said, unfortunately, too many people in the country had totally been taken in by the New Deal and then with Harry Truman, the Fair Deal thinking. And but he said he put together this book when it was published in 1961. He said, but by 1961, now most of the letters that he got in response to his columns were far more favorable than critical. The opinions had changed, but that just shows that in those mid and late 1940 years, how much the thinking in America presumed that it's necessary and desirable for government to have these heavy-handed paternalistic controls and regulations and planning devices over the society. And without the internet and videos like YouTube and so on, how difficult it was both to get an outlet to talk counter to this, unless you were lucky enough to become a journalist like Lawrence Fertig or Henry Hazlitt, who from 1946 to 1966 had a weekly column in Newsweek called Business Tides. There were not very many outlets. And so Leonard Read, by setting up FEE, was not only going against the tide, but in an environment in which the ability to communicate with others was much more difficult. You were dependent upon the printed word, and with long delays between some event and commenting upon them, and the difficulty of even meeting with people to share these ideas. You either talked on a landline of a phone, or you had to physically travel to have a face-to-face things. Today with Zoom and Skype and video calling on your watch or on your phone has totally changed this. But those are difficult times, both in terms of the climate of opinion and the difficulty of communication. And what did Leonard Read do in spite of this? He sets up the Foundation for Economic Education, hits the ground running with starting to do these publications and traveling extensively to present these ideas face-to-face with audiences when people were not ready for it. And I'll just make one other example. And shortly after FEE was set up, this was in 1946, he went and gave a talk before the Detroit Economic Club. And it's called, I Would Push the Button. I Would Push the Button. I know you know this piece. And basically he says is that, suppose there was a button on this podium, right? He's talking at this luncheon group. Suppose there was a button on this podium that if I push this button, all the government controls and regulations and restrictions and redistributions would disappear. The entire society would now be transformed at an instant into a totally free market, unregulated society in which government was limited to the protection of life, liberty, property, and enforcement of honest voluntary contract. And he said, I would push this button. And then he explained why. But he also explained why, by the way, where if a button was there to do this and all the controls were lifted, he anticipated that within a short period of time, all the controls would be back. Not because they were needed, but because so many people had lost an understanding and a confidence in the power of a free society. And that's why the educational task to restore the ideal and the understanding of liberty was so important. And that's what he was about. And those who he has influenced over many generations, of which you and I are just two of thousands upon thousands, why the spreading of these ideas is so important. And it shows the power of the ideas if you just steadfast to what they stand for.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Henry Hazlitt, because he was another one that was there as an integral part of FEE and speaking at FEE seminars, as I understand it, in those early days. And let me give you a personal experience of my first FEE seminar. I mean, here was this guy. It was either at the weekend one or later on the following summer, but here was this man that was having such a profound impact on my life. I mean, I was there, a young trial attorney, but because of Leonard Read, I had put away all my trial books, books on cross-examination, direct examination, jury summation. I was reading Bastiat and all the FEE books that they were selling and stuff. I mean, I bought every book that FEE sold, and they had a huge bookstore there. So, I got the fire in the belly, as many people who just first discovered libertarianism. So I go there, and at one of the luncheons, because everybody ate lunch together and everybody had dinner together after the lectures, and at one of the luncheons, I'm sitting at a two-person table. Leonard Read, and I'm like, wow, but I was prepared, you see. Now, Leonard had this methodology that was fascinating that he emphasized in his book. He says, never argue with anyone. Arguments never accomplish anything. That in fact, he didn't even like debates, but especially argumentation. He says, if you get in an argument with somebody, you're not accomplishing anything. It's only the people that are really seeking that you're going to gain something. Well, so we're sitting there across from the table, and I wasn't deeply as libertarianism yet. I hadn't studied years and years, but here's my chance with Leonard Read. Now remember, I was a young lawyer. I was a debater. I was a college debate. I'd been a college debater. I'd been co-captain of the debate team, and so I said to him, Mr. Read, if everybody in a society unanimously supports and votes and approves to have a socialist system, would you say that's okay, that should be allowed to go ahead and happen? And he thinks for a moment. He sits there for a good 45 seconds to a minute or so. He doesn't say anything. And I'm thinking, oh gosh, what's going on here? And he's just thinking, and then and now I get you. I'm ready to debate either side. Whichever one he gives, I'm ready to debate the other side. I've got the arguments prepared on both sides because I was a debater. You had to learn both sides of the argument. Richard, he gave me the worst possible answer he could possibly give. Guess what his answer was? He says, I don't know. How do you argue with I don't know? I mean, it's like he knew that I was like getting ready to argue, and he just says, I don't know. That was a wise man. And he used to quote somebody, one of the ancients, saying that, I think it was Socrates, that man thinks he knows something, whereas he knows nothing at all. Whereas I, who know nothing, realize I know nothing. So yeah, Read was awesome. I highly recommend it. If those of you that are in the libertarian movement, especially you young newbies, haven't come across Leonard Read, I highly recommend all his books. On that note, Richard, we'll wrap things up. Greatly enjoyed this particular segment and look forward to talking to you next week.
Until next time.
All right, and we'll see y'all next week. Thank you again for tuning in.